Hey everyone, good morning. This is Kenji. I'm at home and I'm about to make some eggs Benedict, which I've been promising my wife I'd make for a while. The first I'm going to do actually, so last night, in a fit of an urge to go baking, I made this no-knead English muffin dough. It's made from Stella Parks' recipe from Serious Eats, but I mostly ignored the instructions because I wanted to make them in the morning, and hopefully they'll come out. And if they don't, I got backup English muffins from the store in the fridge. So to make eggs Benedict, much easier than people think it is. We're going to start by making our Hollandaise, which is an egg and butter emulsion. So you want to use really fresh eggs for this because they poach better, they hold their shape better. So what you want to do is ignore the expiration date. Here's April 29th. Look at this instead for this number, the 3-digit number. This says 090 and this one here says 095. That number is the date, that the Julian calendar date that the egg was packed on. So these were packed 5 days later than the others, which means that they were probably laid about 5 days later than the others. So that makes them fresher. Oh, one broken one. I never worry about the broken eggs. So we're gonna use one whole egg here for the Hollandaise, plus one egg yolk. And I'm gonna save that. I'll save the white here. You can go all yolks if you want. There's not really any reason to use that egg white other than, well, it makes the sauce a little bit lighter, so it's already a pretty rich sauce to begin with, and it saves you having to find another use for that egg white later. I'm gonna beat them up real well. Season with salt. That'll help the egg proteins kind of break down a little bit so they beat more easily. And meanwhile, I'm going to take some butter and I'm going to melt it. I'm going to melt it in here. So for 2 egg yolks like this, I would use about a half stick of butter. Maybe slightly more. We'll see. We'll go until it feels right. I'm gonna microwave this. You want to melt it. A lot of Hollandaise recipes call for clarified butter. I never bother clarifying my butter. People say that it makes the sauce thinner, but I've never found that to be the case. And I actually kind of enjoy the flavor that the extra milk solids, that's sort of that fresh milkiness that comes from using whole milk, whole butter as opposed to clarified butter. I'll show you how you can clarify it if you want it. Oh, this is going to be my tea. I boiled some extra water for my tea. So I'm going to make this Hollandaise the old-fashioned way. It's kind of one of the very first things I learned how to make at a fancy restaurant. I used to have to work at a restaurant called Number 9 Park, which is up near the State House in Boston, up on near the park. Oop. Here's the butter. We'll clean that later. So now, if I wanted to clarify this butter, what I would do is I would scoop off the foamy stuff at the top, and then as I poured it, I would be careful not to get the layer of milk solids at the bottom. And the stuff in the middle is the clarified butter. That's the part you want to keep. But I just use the whole thing, and I will clean out that microwave after, I promise. I don't leave messes for other people. So I used to work at this restaurant called Number 9 Park, and as the new guy, my job was to, sometimes we weren't open for breakfast, but sometimes like the senators and the politicians would have special breakfast meetings at the restaurant, and so I was the guy who had to get there early to make breakfast, and so I made a ton of Hollandaise early on, and I learned how to make it. The very first time I learned how to make, I tried to make Hollandaise, I did it from a book. Where I didn't have any visual idea. I don't think I'd ever had real Hollandaise in my life. I'd only ever had that stuff from diners that is made with a powder. So not real Hollandaise, and I didn't really understand the concept or what it was supposed to look like or even what it was supposed to taste like at the end. I'm gonna add a little bit, sorry. So I got the water here, steam underneath the pot. If you're really good at this and you're paying real good attention, you can do it directly over an open flame by going on and off the heat with the bowl. And I don't really think it's necessary to do that unless you want to show off. This is an immature Meyer lemon. You can use a regular lemon, but this is just what I had. So the very first time I made Hollandaise was from a book. And I didn't know what it's supposed to look like, so I put eggs in a non-stick skillet. I had them kind of over low heat, and I was whisking them until they turned kind of into scrambled eggs. And then I tried whisking in butter, and I ended up with a sort of greasy, lumpy scrambled egg thing. Really what you want to do is you want to whisk, 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 and you're going to see the eggs are going to start to thicken as they heat. Once they get to, I think it's around like 165 degrees, but I never use a thermometer for this. But once they get to around there, they're sort of at their maximum thickness, and it seems like they're going to start to scramble. That's when you want to start adding your butter. I'm going to take that off the heat so I can flip these. I have no idea if these English muffins are going to work. Oh, they're looking pretty good. They're puffing nicely. If you want a better experience, follow Stella's actual recipe, which calls for a mixture of whole wheat and regular flour and honey instead of agave nectar, which is what I used, as well as a full 12 hours for the second rise. So the difference in texture between a hand-whisked Hollandaise and one that's made with an immersion blender, it's not really that significant. But a hand-whisked Hollandaise will have sort of will have slightly more air incorporated into it. So it will have a slightly lighter texture. All right, you can see how nice and foamy this is starting to get. And it's starting to thicken up a little bit. A little bit higher on the heat here. And now actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to start my egg poaching. So I think, I don't know where my strainer went. I think my daughter was playing with it outside. I mentioned the other day. Here, I'm just going to use this bowl. So you don't have to strain your eggs, but I find that straining your eggs really helps give them a nicer shape. So eggs have, here, let me break one out into a bowl and show you. So eggs have a sort of thicker part of the white and a looser part of the white. And by draining them like this, you see how that extra loose white is coming out? That makes it so that you can subsequently get a much cleaner shape when you poach them. That's sort of my real secret to perfect poached eggs. I really, really dislike that method where you put a piece of plastic wrap in a bowl and put the egg in it and then kind of put the egg on, poach the egg in the plastic wrap, because it ends up, first of all, it's nothing like poached eggs because the water doesn't actually come in touch with the eggs. And then more importantly, your egg looks like it's been wrapped in plastic because it has. So I really dislike that method. You don't have to do this step either. And also, you know, even if your egg is a little bit older, so this egg looks a little bit older, a little more watery, white, not quite holding its shape as well, it'll still taste fine, and it'll probably still poach just fine too. So, all right. So I got a couple eggs there. Get a Canadian bacon off to the side. Canadian bacon, it's not really Canadian, right? Everyone knows that, but it is based on something called pea meal bacon, which is a Canadian thing, and it's made with pork loin that's been cured and coated in cornmeal, just like these English muffins have, in fact. So that Canadian bacon is actually is actually cornmeal-free, what they call pea meal bacon. Salt the water. You don't need to add vinegar or anything to it. The vinegar kind of helps it coagulate faster if you have a lot of that loose white, but you don't need it if you do this sort of draining trick here. So little swirl, just so the eggs stay separated, and then whoop, in they go. And you might get worried that they're going to stick together, but you don't really have to worry about that too much. And so you see how now, even though there's some loose white on that kind of older looking egg, this swirl helps contain it. So we're going to let those just sit for a second before we try moving them. Meanwhile, I'm going to continue whisking my yolk mixture. I really hope you're not whisk averse here. This is a pretty high whisk environment. High whisk, high reward. Alright. So those eggs are, you see, don't stick together. Eggs are kind kind of like they don't stick together in the same way that like if you put a bucket full of water balloons together, they don't stick to each other. Eggs have like a membrane around them, so those loose whites might stick, but the actual sack, even though it's an invisible sack, it will not stick to each other. All right, whisking, 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 and you see how this is starting to get a little bit thick. You can feel it with the back of your finger. It's warming up. Not quite hot yet, but warming up. So you'll notice that the texture starts changing as you go, and you kind of gotta be the change you whisk to see. All right, so once it starts leaving these sort of big empty streaks at the bottom of the bowl that only slowly fill in, that's when you know you're starting to get ready to be able to add your butter. So I got my butter here. I'm just going to slowly drizzle it in. It's all in the whisk man. And of course, you can feel free to play with the ratio of butter to eggs if you like. I had a chef who used to use 6 eggs per half pound of butter, which is a lot. But you know, he sort of considered Hollandaise to be an egg sauce. I consider it more to be, egg sauce that's enriched with butter, whereas I can just consider it to be a butter sauce that's bound with eggs, thickened with eggs. You can also think of it kind of as a warm mayonnaise, because that's essentially what it is. It's the same emulsion, egg with fat. All right, so you see how nice and fluffy and smooth it is. Now we're getting down to the part, you see how here, if you watch inside as it drips now, you can see that layer of liquid water with milk solids at the bottom. A lot of people stop drizzling right here. I just go right ahead and pour it all in. Doesn't hurt the sauce. Oops. I've never actually counted the number of whisks it takes to make hollandaise, but that would be a calculated whisk. There we go. We're gonna hold it off to the side, and I think our eggs should be done. Pull one out and check. Yeah, perfect. And the last thing we're gonna do is toast the inside of one of those English muffins. So just a couple minutes on those eggs. Completely loose yolk and gently set white. There you go, perfect poached eggs. Hollandaise does not reheat well. It's difficult to reheat it. It's difficult to store it, so you kind of want to use it when you make it. But if you do want to reheat it, you can sort of leave it at room temperature, and then when it comes time to reheat it, very gently reheat it while whisking over the double boiler again. You might have to thin it out with a little bit of water. All right, which one of these English muffins are we going to use? Let's try this guy. Let's see if these completely misdirected English muffins are going to work. Those look like English muffins. A little floppier. Sure, I'll go with that. I'll take that. Shall we taste our hollandaise? Super light. Nice amount of acid. So you see that texture there? How it's almost like, in fact, it could be a little bit thicker, but it's almost kind of frothy. This stuff is excellent over asparagus. It's excellent for dipping artichokes into. If you make it, instead of with lemon juice, if you make a reduction out of white wine and white wine vinegar with some tarragon stems and shallot in it, you reduce it down to kind of a syrup, and then you use that in place of lemon juice. Then you add chopped tarragon at the end. That's what sauce béarnaise is, which is great on steak. You can also sort of add other things to this. You can make it with red wine for a red wine Sabayon or a red wine béarnaise. You can add herbs. Fine herbs are great in here. I got some chives over there from the garden. All right. There we go. Beautiful. So the only real secrets with hollandaise are you don't want to let it get too hot. Although if you're constantly whisking it, it's really not going to break or curdle too much. There's not very little risk of that. So once it gets to the thickness that you want it, you kind of stop. Don't want to let it get too hot, and you want to make sure that the eggs are thick enough before you start adding the butter. Those are the really only major pitfalls with hollandaise. Also making it too far in advance so that it's difficult to hold. But like I said, you can always reheat it over a double boiler, whisking very carefully. Add a little bit of liquid if it starts to thicken up too much. So you see how now it's like just about the right texture. You can get it around the bowl like this and it kind of very gently flows and ribbons. That's the texture you want. You want a texture that's going to sort of coat that egg. Got our Canadian bacon. Oops, I got a little cornmeal on these eggs. It's all right. Poached eggs, by the way, you can poach them like a day in advance or a few days in advance. What you do is you then put them in cold water and store them in cold water in the fridge. And then when you want to serve them, you simply put them into warm water and reheat them. I'm going to do a very rough chop on these chives. And then I'm going to save this Hollandaise for I'm going to save it for these artichokes here. Yum. Match made in heaven. Okay. So you see how light and airy this is. And as it flows over the egg, it coats it. It doesn't run off in a watery mess. It coats the eggs, which is exactly what you're looking for. There you go. By the way, I'm not always into bad puns, but I figure this is a whisk I'm willing to take. All right, I'm gonna steal a bite before my wife gets hers. Here we go. Let's see how we did on those yolks. Ooh, yeah. Light, but rich. I mean, yeah, handmade Hollandaise is a really sort of unique thing. Here you go, Shabu. Sit. Good girl. Oh, got a little bit of Hollandaise here. Good girl. Audrey, breakfast. This muffin is tasty. All right, see you later.